Ava cannot remember the exact moment she began losing her old life. That is what made everything afterward more frightening than an ordinary betrayal. Because if Lily had simply slept with her boyfriend and run off with him, the story would at least have had a clear shape. A specific date she could pin to the board of memory and call the day everything broke. But Lily did not do things in ways that crude. She did not just betray her, she shifted Ava's life piece by piece, tilting the weight of every relationship, every room, every glance, until Ava was standing in the middle of the job she had once been good at, the relationship she had once trusted, the circle of friends she had once laughed with, and seeing that everything around her had changed angle without anyone warning her. When people hear that a woman had her boyfriend stolen by her best friend, they usually like to imagine one huge explosion, one terrible night, a confrontation in a kitchen, tears, a shattered wineglass, a door slammed shut. The truth of Ava's story was far worse. Lily did not want to take what Ava had just to possess it. Lily wanted Ava to lose it. She wanted Ava to watch it slip out of her hands piece by piece, in a haze just thick enough that Ava would still be busy doubting herself before she could fight back. It was a more adult kind of cruelty, cleaner, harder to prove, and because of that, more effective. If Ava had to name the most frightening thing about Lily, she would not say that Lily was beautiful, though she was, in the kind of way that made people lower their guard. Not because she was charming, though she absolutely knew how to warm up a room when she walked in. Not because she was intelligent, though she truly was so emotionally perceptive that she could almost always hear what people needed before they said it aloud. The most frightening thing about Lily was that she understood exactly how different it was to steal something from someone, and to make the person who owned it look as though they had never deserved to keep it in the first place. Lily chose the second method. By the time Ava understood that, she had already lost her job, lost the man she loved, lost her reputation, and in the worst months had nearly lost the ability to trust her own memory. They met when they were 21 in a dorm hallway at a university in Connecticut, the kind of hallway that smelled like cold pizza, laundry soap, and cheap hair dye. The signature scent of youth when you have no money and far too many illusions. Ava was sitting on the floor, trying to wedge her textbooks into a metal shelf with one bent leg, when Lily appeared in the doorway holding a cup of ramen, her hair still damp on one side as if she had just showered, smiling as though they had known each other already. She asked if Ava needed help, then sat down without even waiting for her to say yes. They talked until nearly midnight about impossible professors, about home, about how everyone seemed more confident than they were at an age when no one actually knew what they were doing. Ava still remembered what it felt like then, the feeling of meeting another woman who seemed bright and soft at once, who understood the rhythm of her speech without making her feel like she needed to brace herself. Lily knew how to listen in a way that was rare. She did not cut in too quickly, did not tell a bigger story to steal the center of the room, did not try to sound wiser than Ava. She simply looked at her with concentration, asked the right questions, occasionally furrowed her brow or smiled at exactly the moment Ava began to feel embarrassed for having said too much. For people who grew up always measuring whether they were too much, the feeling of being received without someone recoiling is more addictive than they realize. Lily became the first person Ava called when she lost a summer internship, when her father was hospitalized with a mild heart attack, when she broke up with her first serious boyfriend after finding out he had another girlfriend at a neighboring school. And Lily was always there, always at exactly the right moment, always just enough, bringing coffee, sitting on the floor while Ava cried, cursing on Ava's behalf when Ava was too heartbroken to curse for herself. Lily said that sentence often in those early years, in different soft variation. I only want what is best for you. Back then, at that age, in that kind of friendship, it sounded like love in its most mature form. Much later, Ava understood that there are people who do not say, "What's best for you?" because they want you to be happy. They say it because they want to claim the right to decide what gets counted as good for you. Of course, there were signs from the beginning, tiny fragments of the structure that would later become complete. But when someone has carried you through the worst nights of your 20s, you do not easily turn around and inspect the hand on your back too closely. Lily complimented in a way that made people warm and shrink at the same time, without understanding why. When Ava was chosen to lead a marketing team project, Lily hugged her tightly and laughed that Ava always had that light that made people want to hand her the big things. as long as she did not self-destruct halfway through. When Ava cut her hair above her shoulders and wore a red dress to a birthday party, Lily looked at her for a long time and said Ava could actually pull off something bold like that if she remembered to keep it effortless. Otherwise, it might look like she was trying too hard. When Ava started getting encouraged by a professor to pursue graduate study, Lily smiled and said that was wonderful because Ava was smarter than most people in their class, though sometimes she exhausted people by being too intense. Comments like that were never big enough to fight over. They lived at the edges of the story like fine dust. If you reacted, you sounded oversensitive. If you did not, they settled at the bottom of memory and stayed there for a very long time. Ava chose the second path for nearly all of her 20s, partly because Lily mattered too much, partly because those little needles were always wrapped in so many real things. Lily drove 2 hours to pick Ava up from the airport when her grandmother died. Lily slept on Ava's floor for 3 nights after her first devastating breakup. Lily helped her move into her first apartment in Brooklyn by carrying boxes of books so heavy they bruised her shoulder. Not everything in Lily was false. That was what made people like her dangerous. They do not build an entire personality out of lies. They plant their cruelty in the middle of enough real kindness that anyone who dares to suspect them feels insane. Mark entered the story when Ava was 33, after she had outgrown men who were too bright, too loud, too addicted to hearing themselves speak. He was a product manager at a healthcare software company, neat in the way he dressed, sparing with his laughter, consistent with texts, attentive to small things, willing to come pick Ava up after work in the rain without needing to be thanked for it. He was not the kind of man who changed the climate of a room the moment he walked in, but he was exactly the kind that could make an adult woman who had already been worn down by life think she had finally found peace that did not need translation. Mark was not perfect. He avoided conflict a little too much, liked being liked, and had the easy politeness of a man who had never had to fight too viciously for his place in the world, and therefore hated anything that made him feel like the bad guy. That very trait would later make him an ideal target. But when Ava first fell for him, all she saw was steadiness, regularity, the feeling of opening her apartment door on a Thursday night and finding Mark already there, chopping onions, asking how her day had been and actually waiting for the answer. The first time Ava told Lily about Mark, they were sitting in a small wine bar near Fort Greene, candles low, just so soft it barely existed. Lily listened to Ava talk about him for 10 minutes, asked a few questions about his work, his family, how he reacted when Ava was tired, then leaned back in her chair, smiled, and said the sentence that made something inside Ava loosen in a way she hated herself for needing. "I actually like this one." Hearing it, Ava felt as if some invisible seal had been stamped in approval. If Lily liked Mark, then everything must be moving in the right direction. Looking back, Ava felt tenderness for the older version of herself, for having handed another person that much authority over the private validation of her life without even noticing. Lily stepped into Ava's relationship with Mark the way she stepped into everything, never bluntly enough to be stopped, only steadily enough that one day you looked up and realized she had been standing in the center all along. At first, it was all harmless enough to be almost lovely. A dinner for 3, a movie night at Ava's apartment, when Lily stopped by to return a jacket and stayed because cabs were hard to get. A weekend in Hudson that Lily jokingly asked to join, and then actually did, because she had just broken up with a man named Greg, and said she would lose her mind if she had to stay alone any longer. Mark liked Lily almost immediately, which was not surprising. Most people liked her. Lily knew how to make men feel more intelligent than they were, and women feel they did not need to be too careful around. She remembered little details, laughed in exactly the right places, asked questions just subtle enough to make the other person feel fully seen. One night after dinner at the apartment, when Mark had gone downstairs to retrieve something from his car, Lily rested her elbows on the kitchen counter and said to Ava lightly, almost like praise, though the core of it made her shrink a little, "He's softer than he looks. Don't run over him when you get stressed." Ava still laughed then, touched Lily's shoulder, said she was not that scary. Lily smiled back. "You don't notice how sharp you get when you're tired." Just one sentence, just one seed. But that was how she began. She did not push a man away from the woman he loved all at once. She simply placed in his head, and in Ava's own head, a more reasonable version of Ava. That Ava was intense, sharp, capable of hurting people without realizing it. Once that seed fell, The rest of the world only needed a little water. The changes between Ava and Mark arrived so gradually that for months she called them exhaustion and nothing more. He answered texts more slowly, but always with a reason. He became more distracted, but still gentle. Some remarks that had once felt like ordinary observations started carrying a different texture Ava could not quite interpret. One night she was telling him how a strategy proposal she had led had been rejected by the board for absurd reasons. Her voice faster than usual because she had been angry since morning. Mark was loading dishes into the dishwasher and turned to her, half joking, half not, and said, "You don't always have to come in at a 10. The sentence, standing by itself, was not wrong, but it landed in her body strangely. She suddenly felt as though she was no longer being heard. She was being adjusted. She went quiet for a few seconds. Mark sighed, smiled tiredly, and said, "See, this is what I mean." Only 3 words, but they opened up a familiar, nauseating feeling inside her. "See, this is what I mean." Exactly the way Lily always said it whenever she wanted to turn Ava's perfectly reasonable reaction into proof that Ava was difficult. Another time, in a taxi after dinner with some of Mark's friends, he said Ava could be a little sharp without realizing it, then added very casually, "Lily said you do that when you're overstimulated. She told me not to take it personally." Ava turned toward him so fast the streetlights broke across his face in pale yellow strips. "Why is Lily talking to you about that?" she asked. Mark shrugged as if it were completely natural. "She worries about you. She sees you from a different angle." That was what made Ava go cold. Not that Mark believed Lily, that he had begun using Lily as a secondary lens through which to see her. Once that happened, every later distance stopped being a distance between 2 people. It became the distance between a real woman and a version of her being constantly annotated by someone else from the outside. At the same time, Ava's career started slipping precisely when she believed she was finally approaching a stable turning point. She was director of strategic content at an educational technology company in Manhattan, had been there 6 years, and that spring had just been included on an internal shortlist for vice president of partnerships. Her boss, Dana Howell, was the kind of woman who only complimented when she truly meant it. So when Dana said Ava had reached the point where she needed to be seen at a higher level, Ava believed it was a real signal, not empty encouragement. Then in the span of 3 weeks, everything changed. The presentation Ava had sent to the board was described as excessively reactive in tone. A call with a major partner ended with the remark that Ava can read as difficult under pressure. Dana began using phrases like, "We need steadier leadership optics." Ava sat in glass conference rooms looking out over the city, listening to each word, and feeling more angry than confused, because none of it matched her actual record. Then one late evening, when almost everyone had gone home, she overheard Dana at the end of the hall telling the executive director, very softly but clearly enough, that there had been concerning off-record feedback about Ava's emotional stability from someone in her personal orbit. That feedback never appeared in writing, but it was enough for the board to pause her promotion. Ava went home with her stomach hard as stone, and spent the entire F-train ride turning over names in her head, trying to guess who could have said something like that. She thought of a bitter colleague, a former employee, a difficult partner. It took her nearly 2 more months to understand Lily had been nudging that door open for a long time. Through a mutual acquaintance in the parent network attached to the company. Through a brunch with Dana, not with open sabotage, just with the kind of concern that sounded impeccably reasonable. Ava has been through a lot lately. I just hope nobody mistakes intensity for stability. Just one sentence, if it lands in the right ear at the right time, is enough. That was the first sabotage. And the most revolting part was that Ava blamed herself for almost an entire summer because of. She thought she had gone into meetings with the wrong expression, spoken too fast, been too tired. She had no idea someone had gone ahead of her and altered the light in the room before she walked in. At the same time, her career began to crack. Her relationship with Mark took on the pressurized feeling of a room about to explode, while no one would open a window. They fought over things that had once been too small to mention. The way she spoke to servers, the fact that he forgot to call her mother after surgery, the way she always assumes the worst whenever he wanted a little more space. And Lily was always there, soothing as anesthetic for both sides. To Ava she said Mark was just overloaded. To Mark she said Ava was stressed and should not be judged by her strongest reaction. With both of them, she turned herself into a cushion between every collision. One time Ava was sitting at the kitchen counter after a long fight, because Mark had canceled a weekend trip at the last minute. And Lily was pouring tea as if this were her kitchen too. He feels like he can't say anything without you hearing rejection, Lily said, keeping her eyes just off Ava's so it would sound less humiliating. And you feel like you can't ask for anything without him disappearing, she added. You two are triggering each other? It sounded smart, adult, measured, but later Ava would understand that Lily had not been interpreting their conflict. She had been writing a script for both of them to read from. Once Mark began believing Ava was someone who heard threat in everything, he would stop trying so hard to explain himself clearly. Once Ava began believing Mark was simply too pressured to express himself well, she would wait longer before naming his withdrawal. That zone of uncertainty was where Lily worked most efficiently. The fake drama Lily staged to break the relationship completely arrived at the end of summer, when Ava was busiest and weakest. It was a Friday night. Mark was at a networking event in Midtown, and Ava had gone straight home after a late meeting, her phone almost dead, her head pounding because she had not eaten. Around 10:20, Mark walked into the apartment wearing an expression she had never seen on him before. Not explosive anger. Worse, the face of a man who had just been convinced the lowest version of you was real. He stood in the middle of the living room without taking off his coat and asked immediately, "Did you tell Lily I'm emotionally weak and basically coasting through life?" Ava actually thought for a second it was some grotesque joke. She stared at him and said, "What?" Mark tightened his jaw. "Did you say that or not?" Ava stood up from the sofa, her heart suddenly hammering for no reason her mind could yet explain. "No," Mark gave a short laugh, one that hurt more than anger. She repeated details. "About the thing with my dad, about the startup I didn't launch, about how you think I need women to do my emotional labor for me." Those details were real. Ava had said them, but not maliciously. She had said them in rare, intimate nights with Lily, in the way women talk when they love a man and are trying to understand his weaknesses so they do not weaponize them. Lily only had to gather those fragments, change the tone, put them in the right context, and they became weapons. Ava shook her head, trying to speak slowly, but the slower she went, the more Mark looked at her as if she were performing. "Lily said she almost didn't tell me because she didn't want to make things worse," he said. And that was the exact moment Ava felt everything inside her go cold. It was not just a lie. Lily had lied in her favorite moral style. The reluctant messenger, the woman who hated to cause pain, but had no choice except honesty. Ava explained, then explained again, getting more tangled the more she talked, because she could not believe she had to deny something both blatant and woven out of things she had actually said. Mark listened, then asked the question that killed almost everything that remained between them. Then why would she say it like that? That question meant he had already chosen his starting point, to believe Lily. And from that point on, every word Ava said became self-defense. They did not break up that same night. They simply cracked all the way through. But that night was when Ava understood a kind of loss, more humiliating than physical betrayal. To have a third person standing between you and the person you love, translating each of you to the other through distorted versions only she controlled. The isolation began after that, long, gray, and filthy as the half-frozen sludge along the curb in February. Ava lost Mark emotionally before she officially lost him. They still slept in the same bed for several more months. But with the distance of two people living beside an invisible accusation, they could never fully dissolve. He touched her less, asked less, every time she was sad. He looked as though he was weighing whether that sadness was just more evidence that she was too much. And Lily, of course, became the only person who could still move close to both of them. She was the shoulder Ava leaned on when Mark went cold, and the place Mark could complain that the relationship had become emotionally exhausting without having to feel like a bad person. There were nights Ava sat in the bathtub listening to Lily and Mark laugh softly in the kitchen after she had already said she was tired and gone upstairs. And though there was nothing large enough to point at, her body knew something was happening outside of language. But because she had been taught so carefully that her reactions could always be called overreacting, she did not go downstairs. She lay there in the bathwater as it cooled, telling herself she was tired, suspicious, wounded because work was falling apart too. When several parts of a person's life start cracking at once, they are very quick to suspect they themselves are the epicenter. Lily understood that with terrifying depth. She let everything collapse almost at once. Ava's job stalled. The relationship went cold. A few mutual friends drifted. A vague rumor about her temperament began moving through the dinner group. And then Lily remained, The only one, as if the whole world had walked away and she had not. That was the stage that later made Ava sick at the memory of how relieved she had once felt every time Lily stepped through the door. She knew something was wrong, truly wrong. And at the same time, she felt rescued each time Lily sat across from her, took her hand, and told her she was the only one who understood how badly Ava was being misunderstood. Not every prison needs a lock. Some only need to make you feel that the person keeping you there is also the only one who still knows how to hold you while you cry. The attack on Ava's reputation came when she was most exhausted. It was winter. Her company was restructuring after a failed deal, and everyone was expected to look more stable than usual. Ava began noticing something tiny, but unmistakable had changed in the way colleagues looked at her. Not hatred, avoidance, odd pauses at the end of sentences, a few internal coffee meetings canceled at the last minute. A younger colleague who used to ask her advice suddenly said, almost apologetically, "I just don't want to step into anything personal right now." Ava did not understand what anything personal meant until she accidentally overheard two people in the creative department in the pantry murmuring that she has been unstable for a while. And apparently there were episodes, just one word, but it created a dark enough zone that everybody wanted to avoid. Ava felt the blood leave her face. She stepped into the pantry. The two of them fell silent and looked at her with the exact expression so familiar to people who have been quietly smeared. Not hostility, pity sharpened by caution, the kind of look that tells you the story of you has run ahead of you far enough to settle into furniture. A few days later, she was called in to meet Dana and HR. She was not fired for any formal performance reason. They used language so clean it was obscene. Concerns around leadership presence, team stability, need for a reset. When Ava asked directly whether anyone had said something about her mental health, Dana did not answer explicitly, but her face did. By that point, Ava had been worn nearly hollow. She did not slam the table. She simply sat there, looking at the HR manager's nude-colored nails tapping very lightly on the tabletop, and thought with total emptiness that Lily had gone further than Mark. She wanted Ava to lose the ability to stand firmly in any space that might have given her power, self-respect, or some support outside Lily herself. The breaking point came on a late February evening, after Ava had signed the exit papers and carried home the cardboard box holding the little plant from her desk, old photos, and a few notebooks. She stepped into the dark apartment and found Mark sitting at the dining table with the face of a man about to say the most cowardly thing he had already decided long ago. And Lily was there, just enough to soften the blow for him. He did not actually need her there. The fact that she had chosen to be there said everything. Mark said they needed to talk. Lily stood as if she was about to give them privacy, but she did not leave immediately. She lingered for exactly the amount of time required for Ava to understand this was staging, not coincidence. Mark said he did not think they were good for each other anymore. That too much had eroded, that he did not know what was true between them anymore, that he felt he had been living in a storm for too long. Ava heard him clearly, every word, and the most painful part was not that he was leaving. It was that he was using language already wrapped and prepared for him. Storm, too much, no longer knowing what was real. Those were all Lily words. Ava turned and looked at her. Lily stood near the kitchen doorway, her eyes red as if she herself had been caught in this against her will. "You've already slept with him, haven't you?" Ava asked. She did not raise her voice. That was what made them both flinch. Mark opened his mouth first, but Lily was the one who stepped fully into the light. "Ava," she said, her voice hurt and soft at once, "it wasn't supposed to happen like this." That sentence made everything go still. Not because of the affair, because it confirmed that Ava's collapse had had someone standing in the middle, arranging the boards one by one, for a very long time. Ava looked at them, at the kitchen where Lily had once sliced bread for Ellie, at the chair where Mark used to sit reading email, at the living space itself turned by those two into the backstage for a new story. And she did not cry. She only went numb. And inside that numbness, something more frightening clicked into place. Not the affair itself, that everything before it, every distance, every rumor, every doubt, locked neatly together like final pieces. Everything started falling apart at once, she thought. And for the first time, she did not think it was bad luck. It was design. After Mark moved out, Lily still remained in Ava's life for nearly 2 more months in the only way she knew how. She did not go public with Mark immediately. She did not fully leave Ava. She called, texted, came by, brought soup, put an arm around Ava's shoulders, said she hated that things had turned out this way, said she did not want to lose Ava, just because feelings got messy. If Ava had been even a little weaker, she might have accepted that explanation just to avoid staring straight at its naked ugliness. But losing your job, and the man you love almost at the same time, has a strange side effect. After you hurt past a certain point, the part of you that is busy making room for other people's pretty explanations dies first. Ava went quiet in a different way. She stopped arguing, stopped picking up every call, stopped telling Lily new hurts, and it was precisely that silence that made Lily show more of herself. She became impatient, called more, appeared more unexpectedly, said things like, "I'm the only one still showing up for you," in a tone that sounded like care but was really an invoice. One evening Lily was sitting on Ava's sofa drinking tea, saying almost in a whisper that Ava would lose everything if she kept pushing everyone away. And Ava looked at her and finally saw what she should have seen years ago. Not a friend trapped inside a mistake, a woman who truly needed Ava lower still, so that Lily's own presence would keep having value. That was the real why. Lily did not want Ava's life. Not exactly. Lily wanted Ava not to have it. That discovery was what turned Ava from someone being thrown back and forth between pain and self-doubt into someone who could finally begin to act with cold precision. She stopped confronting Lily too soon, stopped calling her a monster in her head, because that was too easy and too inaccurate. Lily was more frightening than a monster. She was practical, plausible on the surface. She knew where other people hurt, because she had genuinely hurt in some places too. And she used that knowledge like a tool. Ava pretended to soften. She answered Lily's messages slowly, but still answered, agreed to coffee once or twice, said she just needed more time. Meanwhile, she began collecting screenshots, recordings, timelines, messages Lily had sent Mark before each of their arguments, coaching him on how to hold the line when Ava goes emotional. Messages Lily had sent one of Ava's former co-workers saying she may not be in a good place to lead anything right now. Conversations with Myra, a long-time mutual friend, in which Lily called Mark a good man when handled correctly and called Ava too reactive to keep nice things. The more Ava dug, the clearer one thing became. Lily was not crazy, not impulsive. She had a method. She entered people's lives as a rescuer, learned all their weak points and private shames, and then, when the time came, used those exact things to write them into the role of the problem in front of everyone else. There were even messages between Lily and a woman Ava had never met, where Lily wrote about Ava the way a craftsperson talks about materials. She's brighter than most, but if you make her look unstable, people will excuse themselves from taking her seriously. Ava read that line at nearly 3 in the morning in a dark apartment, and the first thing that rose up in her was not pain but a hard, sharp silence. Not because the wound had healed, because it finally had a name. Ava chose Lily's 36th birthday reunion to bring everything into the light, because it was exactly the kind of place Lily was strongest. A rooftop lounge overlooking Manhattan, low amber lighting, a carefully chosen guest list, enough old friends, newer colleagues, a few exes drifting around the edges, and the kinds of faces Lily loved appearing before because they proved she still sat at the center of any room that mattered. Ava knew that if she wanted to tear the story out of Lily's mouth, she had to do it where Lily could not dismiss it as a private misunderstanding between two emotional women. She did not come alone. Myra was there. Elise came down from Summit in the capacity of another woman who had already been touched by Lily's pattern. Dana Howell came too, not to rescue Ava, but because after months of revisiting a handful of details, she wanted to see how deeply she herself had been manipulated. Ava wore nothing dramatic, just a plain black dress, her hair tied low, her face so calm that a few people who saw her walk in looked almost relieved, as if civility might still save the evening. Lily met her at the entrance to the rooftop, with the very smile that had once made Ava trust her 10 years earlier. "I'm glad you came," she said. Ava looked at her, looked at Mark standing a few steps away in a white shirt, looked at the mutual friends who had not asked her one decent question before drifting out of her life, and understood with perfect clarity that Lily had entered this night as though she owned everything. The room, the story, the man, the final version of herself. Ava let the party breathe for nearly an hour, long enough for Lily to raise a glass, smile, and offer a toast about survival, reinvention, and the people who stay. A sentence that sounded beautiful and almost spiritual. Long enough for Mark to rest his hand on Lily's waist a few times, in that new posture of a man, who had already been used as a symbol for too long without knowing. Then Ava stood. She did not clink her glass, did not apologize for interrupting. She simply got to her feet, held her water glass, and spoke clearly enough for the nearest table to hear first, then the farther one as the silence spread. Before this night goes any further, I want to say something, especially because for over a year now, there's been a version of me in this room that has had a much bigger social life than I have. Lily turned very slowly. The smile on her mouth stayed half a second too long before becoming soft concern. Ava, she said, dropping her voice immediately so she would sound like the only adult still holding the room together, don't do this here. Ava looked straight at her. No, this is exactly where. Then she opened the folder. She did not begin with Lily sleeping with Mark, though that would have been the easiest thing to grab everyone's attention with. Ava began with concern, with the messages Lily had sent Dana saying Ava may not be stable enough for bigger leadership. With the message Lily sent Nate, the man Ava had only just started seeing, saying she might not be in a healthy place to date. With the texts Lily sent Mark, she'll hear abandonment in anything if you're not careful. Let her go into self. Blame first. And then the one Ava read very slowly, making the rhythm of her own voice turn it into something nobody could dismiss as misunderstand. She doesn't have to actually be unstable. She just has to sound like too much. People fill in the rest. When Ava finished that sentence, the sound of the rooftop seemed to drop away, leaving only the wind nudging the glass partition and someone at the bar setting a drink down too hard and then freezing. Mark took a single step forward, his face gone white. "What is that?" he asked, staring at Lily. Lily did not look at him. She looked at Ava with eyes that, for the first time since that night in the apartment, were no longer fully under control. "You're taking private messages out of context," she said. Ava nodded faintly. "Okay, then let's talk about context." She flipped to the pages where Lily called Mark a good man when handled correctly, called Ava too reactive to keep nice things, called Dana easy to nudge if you sound responsible. And finally the message to an old friend where Lily described Ava as if she were strategy. If she loses the job and the relationship close together, she'll stop trusting her own read on reality. Ava did not need to add anything after that. The whole room had already heard the most horrifying part. Not the affair, not the jealousy, the plan. Lily responded in exactly the order Ava had predicted. First, denial. She said Ava was cherry-picking, twisting words, trying to humiliate a woman who had once loved her deeply. Then came tears, fast, elegant, just enough to make a few people instinctively turn back toward her a fraction. Then, when she realized that no longer controlled the climate of the room the way it once had, she shifted into anger. "You think this makes you the victim again?" she asked, eyes red but voice suddenly sharp. "You always needed the room to hurt with you." Ava heard that and almost laughed at how hideously precise it was. Lily was still doing the thing she always did, turning exposure into evidence that the other person was cruel. Before Ava could reply, Elise stepped forward from beside the glass column on the far side. "She did the same thing to me," Elise said, her voice not loud but flat enough that everyone had to hear it. Then Myra laid her phone on the table, opening an old thread. "And to me, just differently." Dana Howell did not side with Ava emotionally. She simply looked at Lily and said, with the dryness of someone disgusted by her own earlier decision, "So the concern about Ava's stability was never concern. It was positioning." That word, positioning, cut cleaner than any insult. Mark stood frozen like a man, finally realizing he had never been the prize. He had been the tool, safe enough to take, he repeated, as if he still could not believe the woman he was now with had written that about him. Lily turned to him, and for the first time something close to pure contempt showed through. "Don't do this now." Mark laughed once, short, ugly, hollow. "Now, I think now is the point. Some victories only exist when the person being used finally understands that he was being used." That moment did not save anything for Ava, but it did knock the final mask off Lily's face. Once Lily stopped trying to look kind, the room finally understood what it had been standing beside all along. She stood very straight, tears still on her face, but her eyes went cold so quickly it was startling. "Fine," she said. "You all want the truth. Here's the truth." Ava walked through life like things just arrived for her. Talent, attention, forgiveness. People bent around her because she made them feel intense things. "I got tired of being the woman who did everything right and still got looked through." Several people in the room held their breath in the very particular way people do when they finally hear the part that has not been wrapped in velvet. Ava looked at Lily, and hated that some part of her understood the sentence too well, because Lily was not entirely inventing the sensation of being looked through. She had spent years beside Ava, watching Ava enter rooms with a light she did not even have to try for, watching other people turn toward her, watching even Ava's failures get called depth instead of mediocrity. But understanding someone's hunger is not the same as forgiving the way they turn that hunger into an instrument of harm. "You didn't want my life," Ava said very slowly. "You just couldn't stand the fact that I still had it." Lily looked at her as if she had been slapped, because that was the truest sentence of the night, and people like Lily bear it very badly when someone names them accurately without shaking. Ava did not stay to watch the rest of it come apart. She had not done any of this in order to enjoy the collapse. After placing the folder on the table and letting the people who had once believed Lily start pulling at the remaining threads themselves, Ava picked up her coat and turned to Mark exactly once. "You made your choices too," she said. No raised voice, no bitterness, just fact. Then she walked through the crowd that had already broken into smaller pockets, past the bar, through the sliding glass door, down the elevator with its cold, mirrored walls reflecting her face back at her like a stranger. In the lobby, she stood for a long time before calling a car, watching the flow of people outside moving as normal. Cabs braking hard at the curb, October wind turning a corner without any knowledge of the structures that had just cracked overhead. Ava thought she would feel lighter. She did not. She only felt cold, because truth, when it finally gets spoken, does not hold people the way justice does in film. It only stops an action. The dead tissue inside you still has to be lived with. Lily did not lose everything that night. Adult stories rarely hand the audience that kind of clean satisfaction. She lost things gradually. First the friends, not through some formal announcement, just invitations becoming fewer, replies arriving slower, the distance widening enough that the person inside it could feel herself being removed from the center. Dana Howell told Ava privately a week later that the board would review the way concerns about her had entered the record. But Ava did not go back. That place was no longer somewhere she wanted to be vindicated. Mark tried calling twice in the first month, texted that he had not known, that he had been led. That part of him had honestly believed he was trying to keep the peace. Ava read those messages and deleted them, because that was exactly the unforgivable part in him. Not that he had been deceived, that he had felt relief in allowing another woman to do the dirty moral work for him, as long as it saved him from having to stand upright inside a conflict. Lily and Mark stayed together for a short while after that, exactly as Ava had predicted, not because their love was strong enough to survive scandal, but because they had destroyed enough to get there, that it would take them some time to look directly at how little was inside. They lasted a season. By winter, Mark discovered Lily was still texting back and forth with an older finance director she had always described as just a mentor. No dramatic new affair was even necessary, just a handful of messages, enough for the pattern to reveal itself, safe enough to take, useful enough to hold. Mark moved out before Christmas. Quietly, nobody defended him loudly, because by then everyone understood that a man who betrays once is rarely someone people are eager to build a fresh story around. Lily lost her reputation in exactly the way she had taken other people, not through one public ruin, but through slow leakage of trust. An old friend texted Mara to ask whether Lily had spoken badly about her behind her back. Another woman remembered how oddly interested Lily had once seemed in the fragility of her marriage. A former colleague of Ava's said Lily had once subtly suggested Ava seemed unstable to another employer too. Any one of those fragments, standing alone, might still have been rescued by explanation. But enough fragments, over enough time, become a pattern. And once a pattern takes on the shape of a person, charm only makes it more frightening, not more harmless. Ava, meanwhile, did not receive the kind of ending outsiders love to imagine on other people's behalf. She did not walk straight out of that rooftop night into some radiant replacement life. She simply moved into a different one, where things were less false and considerably colder. She moved apartments the following spring, not because the old one was contaminated with memory in some romantic way, but because she did not want to keep living in a space where every corner held a belated explanation for a past that had become too clear. She took a new position at a smaller strategy firm, with slightly less money and much more control. She stopped telling her story to people just because they asked with a soft enough voice. She examined care before letting it pass through her skin. There were nights, even many months later, when she would open the refrigerator, look at the milk, the greens, the leftovers, and suddenly remember the way Lily used to walk into her kitchen, as if it were a climate designed for her to exist inside. Memory does not die because truth wins in one room. It simply changes form, from question into scar tissue. If anyone asked Ava whether she had destroyed Lily's life, she would say no. She never destroyed it. She simply stopped standing between Lily and the consequences of what Lily did. That was all. But for people who have lived too long on the moral scaffolding built by others, that alone is enough to feel like apocalypse. Many months after the rooftop night, Lily sent a very short email. No begging, no request to come back, just one sentence. You think you exposed me, but all you did was make people hate a woman who was already hurting. Ava read it, sat beside the window in her new apartment watching February rain slide down the glass, and for the first time felt nothing yank her back into that old zone of shame. Because that had always been Lily's final move. Pull every responsibility backward into her own pain. If Lily hurt badly enough, then her actions were supposed to blur. Ava closed the laptop, made tea, and stood for a long time in the quiet kitchen. Then she understood something it had perhaps taken an entire life as a woman to learn. Some people do not lose their friends because you change. They lose them because you finally stop calling their destruction by a softer name. Lily did not lose Ava because Ava became colder, wiser, crueler. Lily lost Ava because Ava finally looked long enough to see what was standing in front of her. And once you have seen what someone really is, there are very few roads back to the old version of them that once made you feel safe. Ava still lived, of course. She still worked, still bought flowers on weekends, still called her mother, still listened to her friends, still laughed at the occasional dinner where her stomach did not tighten when someone said, "I just care about you." But something beneath her skin had changed material forever. Not hatred, not weakness, just a new kind of cold, useful, expensive, impossible to remove. It reminded her every time someone entered her life too quickly, through perfect understanding. Every time someone made her feel indebted simply because they listened. Every time another woman complimented in a way that cut her down a little. Every time a man seemed relieved when some third person helped explain her to him. What Lily truly took from Ava was not just Mark, not just the job, not just a few friends too lazy to verify anything for themselves. She took Ava's innocence around intimacy, and what Ava kept after everything was not pretty justice. Only truth, cold and heavy as metal. She thought she won because she took the man, the room, the narrative, the softness. But all she really got in the end was a man weak enough to betray, a social circle built on borrowed trust, and a life so dependent on distortion that the first strong light made it collapse. And Ava, who had once thought she might die inside the feeling of being rewritten, did not die. She simply kept living with the irreversible knowledge that some people do not step into your life to build something beside you. They step in to settle inside your structure long enough that you begin to mistake the sound of their breathing for the sound of the house itself. Closest thing to victory, if it must be called that, came on an ordinary night many months later, when Ava stood alone in her kitchen washing the last cup, her phone quiet on the counter, the room no longer tilted toward anyone else's emergency, and realized that this silence was not empty. It was the thing Lily had stolen from her for a very long time and called friendship.